Kethevane, tell us then more about the case and, of course, the upcoming trial as well.
As you said, this is something that happened back in January of 2023. And back then, a 29-year-old Tyre Nichols, a black man, was pulled over for what the police officers said was reckless driving, even though that has never been actually confirmed. 5 police officers, all of them also black men, who were a part of the city's crime suppression unit that was known as Scorpion. They were a unit that was actively going to so-called hotspots in the city of Memphis. After that arrest for that alleged reckless driving, he was dragged out of his car, thrown to the ground, as you said, pepper spray, tased. He ran away at one point, was chased down, caught, and then the 5 officers took turn kicking him in the head, using that baton, punching him in the head. That lasted for several minutes, 3 minutes, according to the report. He was then handcuffed, but he was still alive at that point. He was even interrogated for a little bit before he became unresponsive, then sent to the hospital, and he actually died from his injuries 3 days after that arrest. At the time, the 5 police officers were actually fired a couple of weeks after the event, but several days before the first videos of that arrest actually were made public. There were 5 officers involved in the fatal beating. Only 3, as you said, are on trial starting this Monday. That's because 2 of them decided to plead guilty for these federal charges. The 2 who pled guilty are facing 15 and 40 years in prison. The 3 others who are going on trial could face up to a life sentence if they are found guilty. Of course, this happening at a time in the United States when we've seen over the past few years events of police brutality, but this one specific and particular in the sense that the victim was a black man, but the 5 police officers were also black men.
Yeah, of course, another then accusation of police brutality. But what's being done in the US more generally to try to reduce what many see as a culture of racism and violence within the police?
Well, the first thing to look at is what happened in Memphis, of course, right after that death. The Scorpion unit that I was talking about, that was dismantled. It had often operated in unmarked vehicles with the officers covering their faces. So there was this idea of impunity for those who had some misconduct. So that was done. And then the Memphis City Council approved a series of police reform measures, including some on how and when traffic stops could be conducted by police officers and what they were allowed to do. But the state legislature, dominated by the Republicans, actually overturned many of those measures. So not much really has changed in the Memphis Police Department. Separately, the Justice Department launched an investigation into the whole Memphis Police Department and how they operate. This is something that we've seen happen, for example, in Minneapolis. Remember, that's where George Floyd was killed, a black man killed this time by a white police officer who was also put on trial and convicted. There again, the Justice Department had an investigation. There was also more broadly in the United States an attempt to sort of curb that police brutality. After the death of George Floyd, there was the George Floyd bill that was passed in the House at the time, controlled by the Democrats, but it failed in the Senate. They were unable to pass it in the Senate, so that stayed. And that had several measures about police conduct, about reforming the police force. But as I was mentioning earlier, one of the big elements of police reform in the United States often is to target the racial bias, because very often these are white police officers killing or beating black men or Latino minorities. In this case, you saw that it was black officers on a black man. And so there are a lot of civil rights activists who say that only looking at racial bias when you talk about police reform is missing the point. Yes, it's part of it, but they are pointing to what you said, this culture within the police force of violence, of police brutality, and they point to the fact that some of the most diverse police forces in the United States, like Los Angeles, like New York, like Chicago, actually have some of the biggest numbers of police brutality. And to give you a number, this year we're still on track to beat possibly the record of police killings from last year. Right now, we are at 918. That is according to the Mapping Police Violence database.
Kethevane, thanks very much. Kethevane Gorjestani, of course, will continue to follow that story for you on France 24.